What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. He is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. How are you today, sir?
I'm getting ready for some boozman action, my friend. I was squatting heavy in the living room, getting my living room lifts in. Last heavy lift before I ski, and I'm excited to be out there. First show of the year, my friend.
So you're testing your legs to see if they're ready to ski. Is that the idea, or are you actually trying to like get prepared for skiing?
A little bit of both. And you lift heavy, you can offset some of the cake you consume. So they're trying to keep some balance here.
That is true. That is true. Make room for more cake. Yeah, I'm excited. It's I love taking December off. And there are, as I've been quite clear in the past, I don't love traveling these days. I don't like being away from my family, but I love doing stand-up comedy. I love going out and performing for our fans at live shows. And I am pretty excited to get back on the road. And yeah, here we are. We got a busy year coming up, and this is the first stop, Bozeman, Montana. I know I keep
It's
God,
Bozeman,
I gotta get
but I'm committed to Bozeman at this point. Particularly, I think as people get more annoyed by this, I might just more drastically mess up city names.
Yeah, I know. It is a good marketing tool. But yeah, and then we're all over the place.
At some point, like just things that don't even make sense.
And then, of course, after that, Bozeman, Montana is coming up on January 18th. And then the following weekend, January 30th, one night only in Louisville, Kentucky, then Fort Wayne, Indiana, Key West, Houston, Buffalo, Boston, Chicago, Rosemont, Denver, Cleveland, Tacoma, Spokane, Tampa. A lot of stuff coming up this year. So a lot to be excited about. What missing from our list of places so far is Los Angeles. We have no dates there. I think we want to figure out what's going on with this situation before we go back. I was saying, I don't know, did I talk about this on the members only episode a little bit? Possibly. But so I do, weirdly, because, LA and New York were always for many years like the two centers of stand-up comedy. Those were the capitals of stand-up comedy, with everything else being like, it was always like UFC and Pride back in the day or something like that. There's these two, it was like the LA comedy scene and the New York comedy scene. They could debate which one was the best, but everything else was objectively the second tier. There's comedy scenes around the country, but it was always New York and LA were the top two ones. Now that's changed a little bit post-pandemic and rise of the internet, and Austin became like a major one. So it's a little different now. But just because of that, like, I know a lot of people in LA. I just know a lot of people who live out there. I know a lot of people who have been affected by these fires. The thing is that all of the comedians in LA got so goddamn successful that everyone I know who's been affected by this is like a multimillionaire. And like, that still sucks. It sucks to have your house burned down or to have to evacuate your house. It's really hard to sell to the general public that you better feel bad for this person worth $50 million. That just kind of sucks. All the people in LA with the biggest microphones are worth tens of millions of dollars. And so all anyone's seeing is a bunch of rich people crying about their stuff, which is sad, but it doesn't move the needle. You need poor people crying. You want to really move the needle here. We need to see some pours, which there are plenty of, but nobody wants to hear from them. Anyway, I don't know if you have any hot takes on the LA fires. I will say, I have zero deep knowledge about any of the underlying issues of what led to these fires. Like, I know about as much as Donald Trump knows, and I don't want to sound like him. They go, Rob, there's all these leaves and they got to rake them. They got to rake the leaves, but they didn't rake the leaves because they're a bunch of Democrats, and Democrats don't rake leaves. But it does seem like a pretty blatant, enormous failure of government. We can get into some of this stuff a little bit. I will say it is. I was laying the other night. I was putting my son to bed. He's 3. and he makes me lay on the floor, just like my daughter did at that age, makes me lay on the floor next to him, like he's in his bed and I have to lay down on the floor until he falls asleep, and then I can crawl out of a room in my own house, because that's what it is to be a grown man with children. But so I'm sitting there on the floor and I just like have one earbud in, so I can't really do nothing but like listen to something on my phone, you know? But so I was just going through the clips of all the different like officials in California, and I understand there's a tragic situation. I feel bad. I know, I'm sure we have listeners who are out in LA. If anybody's affected by this, I'm sorry you have to go through that. It's horrible. But listening to, first of all, everyone's a lesbian. It's like lesbian all the way up to Gavin Newsom. I have nothing against lesbians. Our producer Natalie here dabbles. I have no problem with them. I don't know if fire safety is necessarily their calling, but whatever. But it's just every one of them is just scrambling to throw the other one under the bus. It's truly unbelievable. Like they talked to this one woman who's like on the fire department, and they're kind of like, what are you doing? These fires are engulfing everything. And she's like, hey, listen, if we get to the fire hydrant and there's no water there, that's not our problem. We don't do the water. You got to talk to the water department about that. And then the water department's like, you got to talk to the Indians about that. I mean, we had all the water, but the Indians did that. And then it makes its way up to Gavin Newsom, where he's finally just like, I think it's climate change and Donald Trump's misinformation or something like that. It's just, they're all struggling to blame everything they can, when the basic reality seems pretty clear, Rob, which is like that the biggest state government in the United States of America, you know, so like the United States of America's federal government is the biggest government in the history of the world. California has the biggest state government within the United States. Los Angeles is the biggest city within that state, right? And so even when you have a government, I mean, the government of California spends more than many nations do every single year. And yet still they can't complete the most basic services. And I think there actually seems to be a relationship there, where the larger government grows, the more the most basic services that we would all assume would just be the things government would take care of, like say the fire, the fire department or something like that, their services like just fall off a cliff. Anyway, I want to play this clip from Gavin Newsom, but any thoughts on any of this stuff, Rob?
Yeah, the government, they're the abusive boyfriend, and part of their pitch is, hey, baby, in an emergency, I'm going to be here for you. Yeah. And you're not good for planning for yourself, so let me have all the money because I'm better at preparing for emergencies, and I'm going to take care of you, baby. And then the second you have an emergency...
The abusive boyfriend who doesn't have a job.
Yeah.
Doesn't actually produce anything.
Let me manage the finances. I'm better with the money than you are. And if I have the money, then I'll make sure that you got the health care. And if there's ever an emergency, I'm going to stash this, that we're ready for an emergency. And I mean, if you're a person who was living in a $30 million house and you didn't trust the government to build your kitchen, you didn't trust the government to do your plumbing, you didn't trust the government to have the water in your sinks, and now all of a sudden you're dealing with rationing because government doesn't actually have the resources for the fire department, you must start rethinking, hey, why was I relying on government for that one? Why was one of the most important things in this area of fire prevention something that I was relying on the government for? And the big storyline, of which I also don't have this fully validated, but it's been reported in the New York Post and elsewhere, is that a lot of water gets flushed into the ocean, and that's apparently to save some little teeny tiny fish. I don't know why that's important. It's been, even Gavin Newsom has admitted to the fact that there isn't enough not enough water available for the people that are trying to fight the fires. And yes, they've put a lot of money into apparently refilling the reservoirs or whatever is supposed to exist for that. That would speak to mismanagement. Whatever money's been spent not helping the homeless. I mean, California flushes a lot of
huge money spent on the homeless. I mean, like and without solving the problem, without huge money spent. And yet still, if you go to San Francisco or you go to Los Angeles or you go to San Diego or any of these towns, the homeless are all over the place. And so and of course it's become this like crazy racket where there's all these people making like 500 grand, 600 grand a year because they're managing the oversight of the homeless, plant. And nothing, and I will say, I do just, like, as I mentioned before, I do just find this to be a major theme that is, in many ways, it's fascinating. And I think it's a human characteristic, because all of this is the work of human beings after all. But like, we talk about it all the time, generally speaking, with the United States of America. But when you have this, you have this gigantic government that's spending well over $6 trillion a year, just the biggest, most powerful organization in the history of the world. And they're doing all of these things like, they're under Joe Biden, they're trying to set up a Ministry of Truth in the Department of Homeland Security, and they're regulating what big tech companies can say, and they're micromanaging colored revolutions in the furthest corners of Eastern Europe, and they're deciding whether the regime in Somalia is fit to rule or whether we have to overthrow that regime, and whether, and just taking on the world. And then meanwhile, the most basic functions of government, we can't protect our borders, win our wars, balance our budgets, like the simple things that you would immediately, any like Joe Sixpack would be like, well, what does government do? It'd be like, well, I don't know. They do the roads and the courts and the cops, like the most basic things. You're failing on all of those while you're trying to put a man on the moon, I don't mean that literally, but either way, in California, you have this situation where, the government is demanding that we switch to electric cars and we build high-speed rail, and they're going to, what I mean? It's like the biggest government that wants to micromanage every single issue. And then when it comes down to the most basic functions of government, like, are your streets clean? Are there people defecating in your streets? Are there, what I mean? Again, to your point, in Los Angeles, it's not as if these fires were like something that came out of the blue that nobody could have foreseen. This was the problem that you would be concerned with. Like this should have been at the top of Gavin Newsom's list every single day when he gets to his desk. Like, this is the dynamic here. You're in a desert. It's incredibly dry. When fires start, they're very difficult to contain. And obviously it's just one of those examples where, much like with a lot of these things, it's like this is obviously the most like blatant example, but you can propagandize people and fool them and stuff, but you can't convince them their city's not on fire when their city's on fire. That's just, even regular people can figure that shit out. And they certainly seem to have figured this out. People are furious. Go ahead.
And that's a level of extreme negligence that you don't have the water. I mean, if I owned a building that had sprinklers for a fire in what's an industrial plant that could very easily set fire, and I had an advanced sprinkler system, and I just didn't attach the water line to it, or I skipped on the water line bill or whatever, or I was so stupid that if I had to turn off the electricity in the building, that's not on another power source, that's negligence.
Yeah, it sure does seem like a whoopsie. Seems like something you might want to figure out. Here, let's play this clip of Gavin Newsom here, because I do, perhaps one of the more interesting. Doesn't want to engage in
politics. That now is not the time to point out my failures.
It never is. It's so funny, man. Isn't that always the case though, right? Now is never the time to think about how I failed all of you guys. And then later also won't be the time, but let's get to later and then we'll discuss it. I do think one of the most interesting angles on this is like what this ultimately is going to mean. I mean, look, you can't ignore the fact that this comes here. Let me sound like Kamala Harris for a second. These fires happened in context. And what is that context? But it is hard to ignore the context of which this is all happening. Okay, you have had obviously the Trump winning the election, the just crashing and burning of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. You have the corporate media in shambles. You have wokeism kind of on the retreat in a way that even just a couple of years ago would have seemed like very, it would have seemed crazy, for this to be happening in this short a timeline. You have Trudeau stepping down now. There's just, it's like blow after blow after blow. And California is just, there's, politically speaking, there's almost no way to spin this. I mean, yes, Donald Trump just won the election, but Joe Biden is president of the United States of America. Gavin Newsom is it's the president, the governor, the mayor, the head of the fire department. I mean, it's Democrats all the way up and down. Like, there are no Republican fingerprints on this. That's not at all to say that Republicans, if in power, may not have mismanaged things in a similar fashion. And there have been Republican areas where things were very mismanaged. You could think of Texas and the ice storm thing that they had there, but that was a little bit different because it's like, well, Texas never gets weather like this. Fires in California aren't some crazy thing that this never happens. But regardless, in this example, it's just Democrats all the way up and down, and the incompetence just like is so obvious. The optics of this are just all so terrible that I do wonder if Gavin Newsom can survive this. I'm not sure about that. So we will see. Anyway, let's did you want to add something, or you want to go to the
I'm going to
interview?
guess that this has to be the end of his career. I think that this is just there's nothing hidden. It's not happening underground. It's not a fiscal policy that will result in failure down the line. It's not a couple people that aren't getting the health care that they need. Your job.
In your example, in the example that you just used, right? It's like if some chick has like an abusive boyfriend who doesn't work and just kind of lives off of her, but like the promise is, oh, but I'll protect you or something like that. And then some other guy comes up and just mugs her right in front of this boyfriend and he does nothing. You're like, oh, but dude, that was your claim. Like you had to do that. You bring nothing else to the table, like for government to not be able to do the most basic fundamental duty of government, or what's viewed as the most basic fundamental duty of government. It's a very tough thing to survive for. Like, you can't protect me from fires that might come. Jesus, you can't make sure that the fire department has water. Ugh, that's tough. All right, let's play the interview, and then I think there'll be some stuff here to discuss.
I want to know the answers. So I'm the governor of California. I want to know the answer. I've got that question. I can't tell you about how many people, what happened. My own team saying what happened, and I want to get the answers. And I'll be candid with you, wasn't getting straight answers.
Yeah.
I watched the press conference. I met with some of those leaders. We had my team start talking to local leaders, saying what's going on. Our state,
and you weren't getting straight answers from
I was getting different answers. When you start getting different answers, then I'm not getting the actual story. And they're assessing it. And I get that as well. You have to have a little bit of grace, back to the point. We're in this emergency environment and everything else.
Yeah, he's cooked.
What I love about this is that he's basically describing is I have to go talk to these other politicians, and it's like talking to myself.
Yep.
And so what do you know? I can't get an actual answer. Nobody's at fault. This guy's saying it's that guy's fault. This guy's saying it's that guy's fault. And he's got no way to sell this because he's on top. He's in charge. And there was missing water from hoses.
Yeah, there are. Look, man, there is something about, it's like that old phrase, the buck stops here. There is just something about being a leader where in the time of a crisis to come out and go, I want to know too, man. Just like all you guys want to know, I want to know too. It's like, dude, people are looking at you. They want to know. And so they're looking at you to give them the answer. And for you to say, oh, I'm going around and asking my team and they're telling me a whole lot of bullshit, that is just devastating. I mean, that is just not good enough. You got to have something better than that. And this is, imagine like you're in this situation where you have to like evacuate your home with the things you have on your back because there's no time to even, even think about bringing more stuff or packing a bag. And this is what your governor's telling you. Like, don't worry. He wants to know too. That is rough. Also, it's like you can't. There is something about like throwing your team under the bus that is always, I mean, this is the telltale sign of failed leadership. I mean, when you start throwing your own team under the bus and then saying, oh, I'm hearing all these different, contradictory things from them. It's like, okay, well, first of all, you hired your team. That's on you. you were supposed to put the people in place who would give you the answers, you know? That you can't just sit there and say, oh, I mean, look, it's these guys, look at these clowns, don't seem to know what's going on. That is a reflection of you and your leadership and your decision making. So
he might
that's
as well
pretty...
be honest, come forward and go, hey, we messed up, we invested in lesbians, and it turns out that there are gender roles, and certain jobs are just better done by other groups of people. We've seen it in professional sports, and we made an error over here, so I promise we will clear all the lesbians out of the manly jobs in California.
Well, look, to be clear, right, it's like, look, and this is the problem with affirmative action or DEI, any of this type of stuff, when you start making the emphasis that we're going to hire, you know, people from different racial groups or different sexes or whatever. It's like, okay, so they wanted to get a lot of women into firefighting, but what women are you going to get? Right? Like, so this is where you're getting, like, you know, you're going to get the most masculine women in the same way that, like, if your goal was to get a lot of men to be nurses and preschool teachers, you're going to get the most feminine men. I mean, that just typically speak, I'm not saying in every single case, but broadly, that's what's going to happen. Now, that isn't in itself necessarily a problem. I don't think, like, dude, if there's some lesbian out there who is just like the best candidate for any position, then put them in that position, and that's great. The problem is that when you prioritize diversity over job performance, like, when those things butt heads, the question is, which one are you going to go with, right? So if you want, like, if you want to get more of a demographic that are unlikely to go into that field, the practical way to do that is always going to be to lower standards. And so that's what ends up happening, that you pass over people who would have been better for this job because your priority is diversity rather than simply who's the best for this job.
I swear, if you saw what some of these dykes look like, you would have thought they were qualified too.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe. But look, I mean, as anyone knows, I mean, you can, you know, there's lots of examples that people like to go to, like surgeons and pilots, you know, are always the good ones. But listen, if you or somebody you love has to have, you know, a risky surgery, believe me, you'll find out very quickly that you do not care. And even like the most racist, like even a member of the Ku Klux Klan in that moment does not care what race or gender their surgeon is. You want the best. You want the person with the best track record, you know, like, that's it. That's who you want. And anytime that you start putting other criteria in, you muddy those waters to some degree. And that's really what's so devastating about the DEI stuff, is that, like, positions like these, like, and it's different than being like a surgeon or a pilot where it's so obviously in front of your face every single time you do your job, like, people will die if you fail at this job. But positions like this that maybe just seem like political appointments, when the emergency strikes, become every bit as important as those, maybe even more. So anyway, let's keep playing with Gavin Newsom.
So I just want to determine the facts, but no one has any patience anymore. In this weaponized, back to the grievance of Trump, everyone else, there's immediacy, and lies travel the proverbial world, and it's hard
state's
to
literally
get the facts
fire,
out there unless you have back.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally, and then
now is not the time for urgency. It's on fire, dude. When is the time for it?
And to try to tie it back to, like, Trump or the misinformation or something out there. I mean, I've seen this, by the way. It's like, and again, this is, it's funny because the internet has become like a convenient distraction for so many of these people. It's like, when, you know, I see, like, there was this video, I don't know if you saw, but there was I mean, I don't know if it's AI or how you do this stuff, but there's a video of the Hollywood Hills sign burning. It's not real. That wasn't on fire, but they put a video out of it and it got shared a bunch of times. And it's like, okay, yeah, there's misinformation out there, but, like, what? The city is on fire. Like, that's the real crisis here. So what are we talking about with all of this? Like, like you're starting to blame people. Like, is that really the problem? Is that really the problem we need to focus on here? There's misinformation or whatever. It's like they're always just trying to divert from their own responsibility, and it's a pathetic attempt to do so. Yeah, let's finish it.
Those facts, and you can communicate them soberly. And so that's what we're trying to achieve as relates to this. But I have 10 other things we're doing concurrently as well. I mean, across the board on recovery, disaster assistance, getting the major disaster declaration. It may be the first one in U.S. history over a text with the White House within literally 36 hours to get 100% reimbursement for folks out here. We've been working concurrently in all of these areas. We're doing executive orders as I speak as it relates to recovery and land use, dealing with speculation and fraud, and trying to address issues on the Coastal Commission here and address the issue of planning permits and how we address all of the myriad of needs for small businesses, all of this in real time. Again, as the state, even though this is not a state responsibility area, to support the city and the county that are overwhelmed at this moment.
There you go, Rob. Doesn't that make you feel better?
It's actually just charity from him. Hey, baby, I don't. This isn't my responsibility, and I don't even need to work on this. But out of the goodness of my heart, even though it's not a state responsibility, we're going to do our best to pitch in and figure out who's to blame. That's not me.
I'm on the phone. I'm writing executive orders. I'm juggling a lot of things right now. I mean, just this is really bad, dude. And yeah, I gotta say, I don't think he survives this. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. But I mean, you know, it is California, and California is as solidly blue as any part of the United States of America. But this has got to be a bridge too far. I mean, you got to have something better to say than that during this situation. And the kind of like the really, and it's not just Gavin Newsom. I've seen do it a couple times, but I've seen several other people in the media and other Democrats in California. The attempt to like blame Donald Trump, which they've done a couple times, like Gavin Newsom saying, you know, like he wanted Trump to come out there because he's worried he'll withhold aid or something like that. And you're like, dude, this is just, I know you guys like to blame Trump for everything, but this is like, this one, that is a real stretch. It is a real stretch to try to somehow say it's his fault or whatever, shift the focus onto what he's done wrong. Good luck. Good luck with that. Anyway, hope any part of the problem listeners out in Los Angeles are doing okay. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how long this goes and how much devastation there is. Doesn't look good from what I've been reading. All right, let's switch gears because I did want to talk a bit about the continued rebranding of the Zuck, which of course we discussed this on our last episode, and Mark Zuckerberg's announcement that Twitter would now include being able to say stuff, which is a nice feature for a social media platform. Of course, Zuckerberg followed this up by going on the Joe Rogan Experience, which was, I thought, a very interesting interview that a lot of some interesting details came out of. We're going to play one of the clips in a second here. I watched most of it. I did not finish the entire thing. What did you think of what you watched of it? Or did you watch the whole thing, Rob, or did you watch part of it?
Well, I love Joe Rogan.
What's that smile? What's your evil smile about?
I love Joe Rogan. I love the Joe Rogan podcast. But
that's correct. That is the correct answer.
When Zuckerberg said the first time, whatever his new candid answer of, the only reason you build these companies is not for money, but to give everybody a voice. I was like, I cannot listen to this horse shit. And so I caught a couple of the clips later, in which he does admit to the extent that he felt threatened by the Biden administration. I don't give the guy a pass. I mean, you know, listen, you're out, you're trying to save your business, and you're a bitch, and you fell for the last administration. You tried to play ball with them as they removed our freedoms, and everyone was worse off for it. And we all know what you did. And now you're trying to rebrand, and I guess good for you trying to run your business and trying to rebrand. But I'm on the sidelines going, hey, you're a fucking bitch, dude. And not just that, you'll sell us out the next time if you can as well. You don't stand for anything, and your product sucks.
Can I, if I could, first of all, I do tend to agree with you. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I struggle with this a little bit because I wanna be able to take the win, you know, and I don't want to be like I never want to be pessimistic. I don't like cynicism and pessimism, and I you know, so like when a good thing happens, it's like, okay, this is good, but it's impossible to not point out that every time this guy addresses his conversion, it's never even presented as a conversion or even presented at, like, he never acknowledges his part in any of it. And that really bothers me and rubs me the wrong way. Okay, I do want to make this point, by the way, because I think I found a way to make this all about me, and I always like to do that if I can. No, I'm speaking tongue in cheek, obviously, but this is, I doubt I had anything to do with this at all. But I will say there was a little bit of an interesting dynamic that I was thinking about, which I did not think about on the last episode when we were talking about this. But so it was asked, it was asked to Donald Trump if his threats to Facebook, if he thought had anything to do with this. And Donald Trump said, probably. And then Stephen Miller, in an interview recently, talked about how Zuckerberg came to Mar-a-Lago and how he talked to him and like all of this stuff. And it did, I just literally remembering this, but if you recall, when I went on Tucker's show the last time, I did a whole thing of like giving advice to Donald Trump about what I think he should do. And this was one of my top pieces of advice, that Donald Trump should be threatening the shit out of Google. Now, I didn't say Facebook. I believe I said Google, but you know, that's close enough. But now I will say, because I've seen this, by the way, I'm not saying Trump took my advice on that. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person who thought of this, but I did think that that was his best way to play it, was to just be like, hey, look, you were in a situation there where it was a coin flip, according to the polls, of who was going to win the election. Donald Trump, what are you going to do? You know, Google's doing all this funny business. Facebook did all this stuff last time. Your only game here is to threaten them that, like, if I get back in there, I'm going to ruin you if you interfere in this election at all, and then make them too scared of that. And it does seem like there's at least a reasonable chance that that had a real impact. I think Zuckerberg clearly is courting favor with the new administration, the same way he was courting favor with the old administration. Now, you could certainly point out that in 2020, Trump was president and he was still willing to go to bat for the other side. So who exactly knows? But I did see some people on social media and stuff saying like, oh, like kind of calling out hypocrisy here, I guess, like saying like, oh, you guys had such a problem with the government bullying social media platforms in the past, but now when it's Donald Trump doing it, you seem to be happy about it or whatever. I would just say that, you know, look, like from my point of view as a, you know, as a radical libertarian, I would say, yeah, the government shouldn't be involved in any of this stuff. There should be no government involvement in big tech or any private business or anything that's like communications and stuff like that. The government should have no role in this whatsoever. However, given that the first intervention happened already, and if the threat is, if you censor people, we're going to do this, I would see that being much preferable to a government threatening big tech companies to get them to censor people. You know, it's kind of like when people used to say like, oh, you know, Ron DeSantis banning private businesses from having vaccine mandates isn't libertarian. It's like, yeah, that's true. But this whole thing was, you know what I mean? Like the entire thing was created by the government to begin with. So like, I'd rather a government intervention that's at least like cleaning up the last government intervention, or in this case, just the threat of a government intervention to get you to stop interfering in elections. And more importantly, even than that, to me, is just to stop interfering with Americans being able to communicate with one another. So anyway, I 100% support, in the context of time, which is always continuing, I do, in this context, absolutely support Donald Trump threatening big tech companies that if they get in bed with the government to interfere in elections, there will be consequences for that. If that's what brought Zuckerberg to this moment, Well played, I say.
I don't.
All right.
It's in part that, and I think we're done with the whole ESG score thing. The payday that was supposed to come isn't coming. We didn't revolutionize to full socialism. You were going to have to somewhat contend in the market and actually offer people free speech that they want to be on your platforms. And so some of these businesses are having to repivot because the Biden administration and all that didn't win, and it's washing away. It's over.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be the case. Here, let's play this clip, which I did think was the most interesting one of Mark Zuckerberg on the Joe Rogan Experience.
These people from the Biden administration would call up our team and like scream at them and curse, and it's like these documents it's all kind of out there.
Did you record any of those phone calls?
I don't think we but I think
I want to listen.
I mean, there are emails. the emails are published. It's all kind of out there, and they're like, and basically it just got to this point where we were like, no, we're not gonna take down things that are true. That's ridiculous. They wanted us to take down this meme of Leonardo DiCaprio looking at a TV talking about how 10 years from now or something, you're going to see an ad that says, okay, if you took a COVID vaccine, you're eligible for, for this kind of payment, like this sort of like class action lawsuit type meme. And they're like, no, you have to take that down. And we just said, no, we're not going to take down humor and satire. We're not going to take down things that are true. And then at some point, I guess, I don't know, it flipped a bit. I mean, Biden, when he gave some statement at some point, I don't know if it was a press conference or to some journalists, where he basically was like, these guys are killing people. And I don't know, then like all these different agencies and branches of government basically just like started investigating and coming after our company. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Wow.
All right. So look, to say here, I thought this really summed it up. It was interesting to hear Zuckerberg say that. The thing, and I know you're going to agree with me already on this, Rob, but the thing that's infuriating about this, and the reason why it is, again, I'm always a big believer. Okay, I'll put it this way, okay? So Daryl Cooper, who is as Tucker Carlson called him, the most important historian in America today. Daryl, of course, is a friend of mine and was a guest on this show. And what I always kept recommending to people to check out is he made this amazing series on the history of Israel and Palestine, before the creation of the state of Israel, which it's called the Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, and it's on the Martyr Made podcast. It is so good. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's like 26 hours long. It's essentially a book on tape, but it's so captivating, and it's just filled with great history, and it's a really interesting story. By the way, for most people, just a little aside note, but it made me more sympathetic to the Israelis than I was coming into it, or Zionist settlers, because this is before the creation of Israel. It's not like a one-sided story. It's just it's a retelling of the very interesting and complex history of the region. Anyway, at the end of this series, so you're 26 hours into it now, and he's gone deep from the very beginning of Zionism all the way till I think it ends in 1947. Like, World War II is over, and the creation of I think it takes you through the UN partition recommendation. But at the end of it, so you've gone through 26 hours of this guy giving you like this in-depth, very interesting and very brutal and bloody history of the region. And what he talks about at the end is how, in order for peace, to ever be achieved, there has to be a recognition and an apology for some of the things that have happened in the past, kind of on both sides. And he goes, look, like you could say that this is overly, I don't know, like naive or pie in the sky or something. But he gets into this story about how there were these guys he knows, he was a military guy, and how there are these guys who would go essentially on like these missions to pay off people who we killed or family members of people who we killed. So like when there's like, we drone bomb some village in Iraq or Yemen or wherever, and a few 13 innocent people get killed. Well, the military will send some people there with a check and an apology, which is very like crude in a way. You have to put a price on someone's nephew that you just killed. And he was like, so he's talking to his buddy who did that. And he was like, Jesus, that must be tough, because like people must be so insulted and infuriated that you did this to the, you're coming, like, you just like, oh, sorry, we killed your kid. Anyway, here's a check. And he said that his friend told him that that very rarely happens. They were very rarely very upset. Usually they were just, and even more so than the check, usually they really appreciated that someone was acknowledging that what happened to them happened and it was wrong. And anyway, the point I'm making here is just that the apologies are powerful things. And if Zuckerberg were to get on here and just kind of admit to his role in it and be like, I just really feel bad that I played this role in it. I think it would be much easier for someone like you, Rob, to hear it and go like, all right, good for this guy. I gave the example on the last show we were talking about it. If there was like, you found out your wife or your husband was like having an affair for years, and like, maybe they're in, like, for this analogy to fit this part, like they're having an affair for years, and then the person's like, I want you to leave your husband and come run away with me. And they say, no, they're not going to do that. And they come back. But then as they're telling the story, they were like, and then he was like, come run away with me. And I was just like, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. And you're like, yeah, but what about the years before that? It's like Zuckerberg is telling this story and he's going, the government asked us to censor the truth. And we were just like, no, we're not going to do that. And you're like, yeah, after years of doing it. Like, no, sorry, that's not the story. The story isn't that the government asked you to censor the truth, but you refused because you're committed to free speech. The story is the government asked you to censor the truth. You said, yes, sir, daddy government, and proceeded to do it for 8 years. For 8 years. I mean, don't get me wrong. The worst of it was in 2020, and it continued all the way. He just changed the policy last week, Rob. Last week. Okay, the worst of it started in 2020, but it really started in 2017. He was doing it all through that time. 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. Going into 2025, he stopped. So sorry, you can't tell that story and the story be the government asked us to censor the truth. And we were like, what? No. We're not going to do that. No. What happened was that the government asked you to censor the truth. You said, yes, sir. You did it for 8 straight years. Then that was soundly rejected by the American people. And Donald Trump is now on his way to return into the White House. And then you said, all right, we're going to let people tell the truth again. Let's just get it straight, right? You know what I mean, Rob? Like, this is just like what actually happened here. And at least from my perspective, if the goal is to like rehabilitate Mark Zuckerberg's image, or if the goal is to rehabilitate the image of Instagram and Facebook, that isn't doing it for me, because it's just you're shirking all responsibility. You know what I mean? And like you do have at least some. And by the way, I think there's also a way that Zuckerberg could have said this to me and you particularly, that would have gotten us to go like, okay, fine. Like if you've been like, listen, man, you don't understand the enormous pressure. And I didn't really wake up to this myself until kind of recently. And I feel bad about what I participated in, but like the government was telling me this and I just can't, like there's a way to say it, but this is just this is bad history. You know what I mean? It's not true that if this had happened, let's say, by the way, he never engaged in the censorship. The government came to him and said, we want you to censor the truth. And he said, no, like exactly what, but we were having this conversation in 2016 and he was just blowing the whistle and being like, just so you guys know, this is what the government's telling me. But I said, no, we'd be lauding this guy as a hero. Okay. The problem is he's yada-ing over the 8 years where he did censor the American people. And I don't feel like the right thing to do is to just let that slide. I don't know. Any thoughts?
Name names.
Yes.
I said on the last episode, it's the same as the Cuomo thing when you leave CNN and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I'm doing real journalism. Well, then you got to let us know what was keeping you from doing it the last time. You got to name some names.
That you did, admit that you weren't doing it.
Yeah, and tell us the mechanisms and the pay and all the reasons that you weren't, so that maybe we can cleanse whatever systems are in place that are keeping people from doing real journalism. Or in this case, if government came around and they intimidated you into taking over your business, so that you were no longer an honest business, name names.
Yes,
and that's the only way to cleanse it and do something brave.
100%. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Sheath Underwear, the best pair of boxer briefs you will ever own. I love Sheath Underwear, the only underwear that I ever wear. I threw out all my other pairs of boxer briefs because these are the best. They're made with moisture wicking technology. You just feel these things, but even before you put them on, just feel them in your hands and you're like, oh yeah, that's a nice pair of boxer briefs. And let me tell you something, you feel like $1 million when you got a pair of Sheath Underwear on. Also, they've been a long-time sponsor of this show, so make sure you support the sponsors who support this show. And while you're at it, get the best pair of boxer briefs you're ever going to own. And if you use promo code problem20 when you go to sheathunderwear.com, you will get your underwear for 20% off. Get the best pair of boxer briefs you will ever wear for 20% off at sheathunderwear.com when you use the promo code problem20. All right, let's get back into the show. 100%. That's exactly right. And then again, you'd be a real hero if you were to do that. Now, okay, leaving that aside, and even though I don't know about the Leonardo DiCaprio meme.
What, it's with the one meme that floated by that for some reason it probably, by the way, did get shadow ban censored, just not completely removed. And the idea that they weren't censoring when the fact checkers or whatever the COVID team was included Peter Daszak, who bought the virus itself, the CIA cleanup team that had to go oversee Facebook and to make sure that none of the true information was going to be available on the platform.
Yeah.
The real story here, by the way, goes all the way back to Cambridge Analytica and Donald Trump winning the first time and him being called in front of Congress. And that's why actually tell the story. We can showcase what the deep state did to the internet and educate the public to the degree of censorship and socialism that we actually have here.
And the story is really fascinating. It's like, oh, the guy who wasn't supposed to win won, and he leveraged social media in order to do it. And the government decided, well, we got to plug up that hole. And then for 8 years, you helped them plug up that hole. I mean, like, honestly, you kind of can't overstate how consequential that was. We have no idea what this country would look like if we had maintained freedom on the internet for those 8 years. It's like different for sure. Okay, that being said, look, a lot of the stuff that he just said there, I'm not sure if all of it, but a lot of it certainly was in the emails that Jim Jordan, was able to get, that are all part of the public record now. It still really is remarkable to hear the head of two of the biggest social media sites blatantly say this. And I got to say, I do, as we've said for a while, I do think it's like, like we have this dynamic all the time on the show, Rob. It's really unbelievable. It's unbelievable how many times the establishment or just the truth comes out a year and a half, 2.5 years, 3 years after we were talking about it on this show. Like now it's just the thing that you're allowed to talk about. And now it's just the thing that we all admit is true. When we were talking about it, it was like, oh, this is a conspiracy theory or something like that. I was mentioning on the members only episode when they were trashing me on the Reason Roundtable. This is 2 years ago now, or I guess more than 2 years ago, because I wasn't in this house yet. So 2.5, 3 years ago, something like that. And they were trashing me when I was saying that libertarians who go, oh, it's a private company, they can censor people if they want to, were idiots and were completely missing the point, because I was like, this is clearly the government who's doing this. It's not Facebook who's censoring people. It's the government censoring people. And then they were trashing me on the Reason Roundtable, and the Catherine Ward, or whatever her name is, was like, oh, I guess Dave can't tell the difference difference between the government and Twitter. Or Dave doesn't know the difference between Facebook and the government. It's like, I think you don't know the difference, actually. But so anyway, it's nice to hear this like officially admitted and officially said. I will say this. In the spirit of not wanting to be pessimistic, as I mentioned earlier, I think here's a white pill for you. Okay, here's a case for optimism. How crazy is it that, as I said before, this most powerful of governments, the most powerful government in the history of the world, who's involved in just wars and, regime changes and covert operations and all of this, they really cared that much about a meme. See, that to me is actually really encouraging. Like, they were worried about a meme that was talking about how there's going to be a future class action lawsuit against the COVID vaccine, and they couldn't allow that to happen. That I think there's actually something really encouraging about the fact that they see satire as being such a threat to them. It's like they know their policy is so ridiculous. They know their propaganda is so thin that they can't even allow for people to be able to mock it. And the reason why that's so encouraging is because it kind of, it seems to indicate that they believe we have a real fighting chance. You know what I mean? Like, they believe that if we're allowed to do that, it's a threat to their ability to rule. And that I just find tremendously encouraging. You get what I'm saying?
Yep. I mean, we've said the example a million times, but it's the emperor with no clothes. And so they can't have anyone possibly pointing out, hey, that's a fumbling old man. That guy has dementia. Hey, this new vaccine hasn't been tested. Hey, I don't understand why I need it if it's supposed to protect you. So then why am I in danger if I'm leaving? Yeah, their lies are so big and so bold, they can't have any criticism. And that's why Elon Musk, I don't have a full picture of him, at least the Twitter, restored freedom of speech to the internet and completely eroded their game plan, because what they're doing only works if they have full-scale censorship. It's like truth is like a leak in a building or something, if there's if you don't plug the hole, the water's coming through.
100%. That's exactly right. And I find that very encouraging, especially seeing as how these holes are now unplugged. And it seems like we at least have some freedom of speech on the internet. Some, not perfect, but a lot more than we had before. And I think that gives us a fighting shot to really counter the propaganda and deprogram as many people as we can. Okay, I wanted to play one more clip before we get out of here, which is this one has been going super viral over the last few days. Here is Barack Obama and Donald Trump hanging out at Jimmy Carter's funeral. Let's roll that.
President Obama there, elected in 2008, served 2 terms, and then yielded there to President Donald Trump. Carter. President Obama.
All right. I mean, that's all that it is. Now, people are making a lot out of this, but it is, I suppose it does kind of say something, right? That it's like one more example of like, you guys told us he was Hitler. You told us democracy was on the ballot. It sure does seem like you didn't really believe any of that. Sure does seem like George Carlin said it's a big club and you ain't in it. And there is such a WWF quality to politics, where you really do have these guys who, like, when the cameras come on, they act like they're mortal enemies, but then they're having dinner together, their kids are hanging out, they're friends. This is kind of just one more reminder of that. But I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make anything more out of it than that. It was pretty goddamn hilarious to just watch the dynamics between the look, I'm not trying to read too much into these little bits of video that we get, but if you see the full thing, it's like you just see like Trump and Obama are like dudes, and they're just like hanging out, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna laugh a little bit. Bill Clinton is sitting right next to Hillary Clinton, and you could just see all over his face he wishes he could be a dude so much. Like, he's like, man, if I could just shake this one, I could go be a dude. I'd be over there laughing with these guys. And then Kamala Harris is just furious, man. And there's one point where they actually get her looking over her shoulder and she just sees Obama and Trump laughing with each other. And it was just, I mean, it was just perfection. I don't know, Rob, any thoughts on any of this stuff?
I don't know that I have much to add to that one. It's but I did notice Bill in the background reading his pamphlet, just being like, look normal, look normal. Just, do you read pamphlets at these things?
Okay, so I did want to say
there's that footage. Do you remember from the Bush Senior? I think when he died, and there was the spooky envelopes that they all got.
Yeah. That's right. I forgot about that. Well, I did want to mention this. So I was on Piers Morgan's show a few days ago, and they never, or I shouldn't say never, but they almost never do this. But they sent me the topics that we're going to talk about on the show. Usually they don't. Usually they don't send me who's on the panel, what the topics are. You don't know. You just show up and you're in the middle of like a thing. But so one of the topics was the legacy of Jimmy Carter. And I was like, oh, yes, I love this topic because I actually have something to say about this and not too many people do. And like, so I'm sitting there. Now, if you go watch this appearance, this most recent appearance, and this, toward the end of it, I'm kind of quiet. Like they're talking about Tommy Robinson and the like Muslim gang rapes in the UK that I guess were covered up for many years. It's just not a topic I know that much about. And I don't really know anything about Tommy Robinson. And then like, you know, they're arguing over whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. And I don't know, but I'm just sitting there in my mind because I'm like, well, next topic is Jimmy Carter. Now I'm really excited to talk about that. And then they just never came to Jimmy Carter. And Pierce just ended the show. And I was like, oh, man, that sucks. I thought that was a way more interesting topic. So anyway, let me just say this here. And of course, this is nothing like this, you know, it's like our camp, the libertarian guys, particularly led by the great Scott Horton, and his book, Enough Already. The first chapter is about Jimmy Carter. I highly recommend people read chapter 1 of Enough Already, and then the rest of the book for that matter. But it has been interesting to me in the week since Jimmy Carter's funeral that whenever anybody brings him up, nobody seems to actually talk about what was really impactful and lasting about his presidency, which was an enormously consequential presidency, even though he only had 4 years. Everybody, when they talk about Jimmy Carter, they just tend to kind of say like, it's like, I don't know, Rob, what's the Jimmy Carter thing? Well, he was like a really decent, honest guy. He was a peanut farmer, you know, and then he became president and like really sweet guy, maybe a little bit too liberal and ineffective, and that's why he only got 4 years. Then went on to be a real critic of Israel for the years after he was president. That's basically what's said. What Jimmy Carter, okay, so Jimmy Carter was president until Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, January 20th of 1981. So Jimmy Carter was president during 1979 and 1980. These were two enormously important years and really laid the groundwork for all of the disaster in the Middle East since then. So in 1979, you had a revolution in Iran and a coup in Iraq. So the Iranian regime that we know today, they came into power in 1979, and Saddam Hussein came into power in Iraq. And then the same year was the policy of luring the Soviets into Afghanistan by building up, supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And of course, as most people know at this point, this didn't mean just supporting the Afghan Mujahideen. This included the foreign Arab fighters coming in, including Osama bin Laden and many of the people who were involved in Al-Qaeda. So this was really a Jimmy Carter policy to teach Osama bin Laden how to lure a superpower into an unwinnable war in Afghanistan in order to bankrupt them. He was also the one who essentially greenlit Saddam Hussein to go to war with Iran. this brutal war that broke out in 1980. Something like 500,000 people on both sides died. Now, in this war, as this war breaks out in 1980, right? So this is the dynamic. You also have the Soviet Union fighting a war in Afghanistan, and you have Iraq and Iran fighting war with each other. And it was Jimmy Carter, under the advice of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who, the dad of that chick on Morning Joe, who we like to make fun of all the time. Remember that retard? Okay, well, her dad wasn't a retard. Her dad was a very smart, evil guy. But under his advice, they are the ones who set up what they called the Carter Doctrine. So after, think about how crazy this is. You know, when you hear about, like, in Syria, how we're like, we're arming Al-Qaeda in Syria while we're fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq. You remember how we were doing that for years? Okay, well, this is how crazy this is. After they lure the Soviets into Afghanistan, then they all start getting worried that they're going to take Iran next. And then the Soviet Union is going to control the Middle East oil supply. So Jimmy Carter is the one who decides to push the Carter Doctrine, which he first brought up. It was early 1980. So it was his State of the Union in 1980. And essentially what this doctrine was to say that the Persian Gulf is America. And if anyone moves on the Persian Gulf, we will take that as an attack on America. Now, in order to do this, of course, we're going to have to start building up our bases around the Arabian Peninsula. And so it was actually Jimmy Carter who put us on this path that ultimately led to the disastrous terror wars. Now, obviously, I'm not putting all of the blame on Jimmy Carter. There were a lot of people who came in after him and didn't have to make the decisions they made. But that is the real legacy of the Carter administration, that he started us on this path that ended in all of these disastrous wars. So no, Jimmy Carter was not a good man or a good president. And the fact that he said some nice things about the Palestinian people in the years afterward doesn't undo all of that shit. Okay, anyway. Just wanted to end on that. All right. Thank you guys very much for listening. Go check out Rob's other show, Run Your Mouth. Go check us out on the road, comicdavesmith.com for all those ticket links, and support the show at partoftheproblem.com if you can. We very much appreciate that. Any final things to plug,
go
Rob?
check out, even if you don't want to check out the full Run Your Mouth podcast, I'm doing about 2 episodes a week. The first 5 minutes are kind of a spoof news intro, a lot of sketches in there. So go check them out. Give them a watch. Robbie the Fire. All
Hell
one
yeah.
word.
Robbie the Fire, all one word. Thank you guys for listening. Catch you next time. Peace.